She was just the billionaire's intern until a late-night project set both their hearts on fire. Before we explore all the details of this incredible story, tell us where you're following us from and the time. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss a thing, and let's embark on this journey together. The elevator doors slid open with a whisper, revealing a view that made Janelle Brooks forget to breathe. 43 floors above Atlanta's bustling streets, the offices of Hale Innovations stretched before her like something from a dream. Floor-to-ceiling windows wrapped around the entire space, offering a panoramic view of the city she'd called home for 25 years. But from up here, Atlanta looked different, smaller, more manageable, as if she could finally see beyond the limitations that had always seemed so permanent. "Miss Brooks?" The receptionist's voice pulled her back to reality. "Mr. Davidson is waiting for you in conference room C." Janelle smoothed her navy blazer, the one she'd bought specifically for this moment, and walked across the polished concrete floor. Her reflection moved alongside her in the gleaming surfaces, a young black woman with natural hair pulled into a sleek bun, carrying herself with the careful confidence of someone who'd worked twice as hard to earn half the recognition. The internship coordinator, James Davidson, was exactly what she'd expected. Mid-40s, expensive suit, the kind of practiced smile that never quite reached his eyes. He gestured to a chair across from him, and Janelle noticed how he kept checking his watch. "Strategic Design Master's Program at Georgia Tech," he said, flipping through her portfolio without really looking. "Impressive GPA. Strong recommendations." He paused, finally meeting her gaze. "But I'll be honest with you, Miss Brooks. This isn't your typical college internship. We work at a different pace here. Our standards are unforgiving." Janelle leaned forward slightly. "I wouldn't expect anything less from a company that's revolutionized 3 industries in the past decade." Something shifted in Davidson's expression, surprise, maybe even respect. "You've done your homework. When something matters to you, you don't just show up hoping for the best," she replied. "You prepare for the opportunity you've dreamed about." For the first time since she'd walked in, Davidson's smile seemed genuine. He closed her portfolio and stood up. "Welcome to Hale Innovations, Miss Brooks. Your supervisor will brief you on your first assignment. One piece of advice?" He paused at the door. "Christopher Hale built this company on the belief that ordinary thinking produces ordinary results. If you want to survive here, let alone thrive, you'll need to think differently." As Davidson left, Janelle remained seated for a moment, absorbing the weight of where she was. Through the conference room's glass walls, she could see employees moving with purpose, their conversations intense and focused. This wasn't just a job, it was a machine built for innovation, and somehow she'd earned her place inside it. Her first week passed in a blur of orientation sessions, design software tutorials, and late nights learning the company's methodology. Janelle threw herself into every task, no matter how small, treating each assignment as if her future depended on it, because maybe it did. The other interns seemed content to coast, to do the minimum and collect their credits. But Janelle had grown up watching her mother work double shifts at the hospital, had seen her father take night classes after 12-hour days at the warehouse. She understood that opportunities like this didn't come twice. By Thursday of her second week, she'd already caught the attention of her supervisor, who'd started giving her more complex projects. Real work, not busy work. As she sat at her assigned desk, a sleek workstation overlooking the city's southern skyline, Janelle felt something she hadn't experienced since childhood, the pure electric sensation of being exactly where she belonged. The office began to empty as evening approached. The hum of conversations faded, replaced by the soft clicking of keyboards and the distant sound of traffic far below. Janelle loved this time of day, when the space felt more intimate, when she could focus without the constant buzz of corporate energy. She was deep in sketching preliminary concepts for a client presentation when her phone buzzed. An email from Davidson, marked urgent. "Miss Brooks, need you in the executive conference room on 45. Confidential project requires immediate attention. Ask security to escort you up." Janelle stared at the message, her heart beginning to race. The 45th floor was executive territory, a place she'd never imagined setting foot in, especially not 2 weeks into her internship. As she gathered her materials and headed toward the elevator, one question echoed in her mind. What kind of project required an intern at 9 o'clock on a Thursday night? The elevator climbed higher than she'd ever been in the building, and with each floor, Janelle felt as if she were ascending toward a moment that would change everything. She had no idea how right she was. Janelle is about to go up to the 45th floor for a confidential project at 9 p.m. Do you think she is being tested, promoted, or heading toward a situation that could change her life forever? What would you do in her place? The 45th floor was a different world entirely. Where the lower levels buzzed with open workspaces and collaborative energy, this floor whispered power in every detail. Rich mahogany paneling lined the walls, and original artwork, not prints, but actual paintings, hung in perfect alignment. The carpet beneath Janelle's feet was so thick it seemed to absorb not just sound, but doubt itself. The security guard who'd escorted her up nodded toward a set of double doors at the end of the hallway. Executive conference room. Mr. Hale is waiting. Janelle's steps faltered. Mr. Hale? Christopher Hale himself was in that room, not some middle manager or department head. The man whose face graced business magazines, whose company had been featured on the cover of Forbes 3 times in 5 years. The billionaire CEO who, according to office whispers, hadn't spoken directly to an intern in over a decade. She paused outside the doors, her reflection staring back from the polished brass handles. Think differently, Davidson had said. Ordinary thinking produces ordinary results. Taking a deep breath, Janelle pushed open the doors. The conference room was dimly lit, with only the soft glow of table lamps casting warm pools of light across the massive oak table. Floor-to-ceiling windows revealed Atlanta's nighttime skyline, the city lights twinkling like scattered diamonds against black velvet. But it was the figure at the head of the table who commanded her attention. Christopher Hale looked up from a spread of documents, and for a moment, time seemed suspended. He was younger than she'd expected, 37 she remembered from the company bio, with dark hair that looked like he'd been running his fingers through it and eyes the color of steel. He wore a white dress shirt with the sleeves rolled up and the top button undone, as if the formal facade of the day had been carefully peeled away. "Miss Brooks," he said, his voice carrying a subtle warmth that surprised her. "Thank you for staying late. Please, have a seat." She chose a chair across from him, close enough to work, but far enough to maintain professional distance. "Of course, Mr. Hale. How can I help?" He slid a thick folder across the table. "We have a client presentation Monday morning. Fortune 500 company looking to completely rebrand their consumer experience. The preliminary concepts we've developed are..." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "Predictable." Janelle opened the folder, scanning the designs quickly. Clean lines, safe color palettes, corporate-approved messaging. Everything was technically perfect and completely forgettable. "They hired us because they wanted innovation," Christopher continued, loosening his tie slightly. "But somewhere in the process, we've given them what they expected instead of what they need. I want fresh eyes on this, someone who hasn't been conditioned to think inside our usual parameters." "You want me to redesign this entire campaign?" Janelle tried to keep the incredulity out of her voice. "By Monday. Not redesign, reimagine." He leaned back in his chair, studying her. "I've been watching your work, Miss Brooks. Your portfolio showed promise, but what you've produced in just 2 weeks here shows something more." Instinct. Heat rose in her cheeks. He'd been watching her work. She'd assumed her supervisor had been the only one paying attention. "The question is," Christopher continued, "are you willing to take a risk? To present ideas that might fail spectacularly but could also change everything?" Janelle looked down at the folder, then back up at him. In the soft lighting, she could see the exhaustion around his eyes, the way his shoulders carried the weight of constant decision-making. This wasn't just about a client presentation. This was about a man who'd built an empire on innovation and was afraid he might be losing his edge. "What's the worst that could happen?" she asked. A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "They could hate it so much they fire us and sue for the retainer. And the best? They could remember why they wanted to work with us in the first place." Janelle closed the folder decisively. "Then let's give them something to remember." For the next 3 hours, they worked side by side. Christopher proved to be nothing like the distant CEO she'd imagined. He asked thoughtful questions, challenged her assumptions without dismissing them, and had an unexpectedly sharp sense of humor. When she suggested turning their safe corporate presentation into an interactive experience, he didn't hesitate to pull out his laptop and start sketching technical requirements. "You know," he said during a brief break, both of them standing by the windows with cups of coffee from the executive kitchen, "most people in this building are afraid to disagree with me." "Should I be afraid?" Janelle asked, watching the traffic move like tiny lights through the streets far below. "No," he said quietly. "You should keep being exactly who you are." The way he said it, with a sincerity that seemed to surprise even him, made Janelle turn to look at him. For just a moment she saw not the CEO, not the billionaire, not the man whose decisions affected thousands of jobs, but simply Christopher. Someone who worked late into the night because he cared, who rolled up his sleeves and got his hands dirty, who was willing to bet his reputation on the instincts of an intern he barely knew. "Mr. Hale," she started, but he held up a hand. "Christopher," he said, "after midnight I think we can drop the formalities." As they returned to work, Janelle felt something shifting between them, a recognition, a connection that had nothing to do with corporate hierarchy and everything to do with two minds that understood each other's rhythm. By the time they finished the preliminary framework, it was nearly 2 a.m. The building was completely empty except for security, and the city below had settled into its quieter nighttime pulse. "This is good," Christopher said, reviewing their work. "This is better than good. This is exactly what they didn't know they wanted." Janelle gathered her materials, suddenly aware of how intimate the past 5 hours had felt. "I should probably head home and get some sleep before tomorrow." "Tomorrow's Friday," he said, walking her to the elevator. "Take the day to refine these concepts. I'll have Davidson clear your schedule." As the elevator arrived, he placed a gentle hand on her arm. "Janelle," he said, using her first name for the first time. "Thank you. You've reminded me why I love what we do here." The elevator doors began to close, but not before she saw the way he was looking at her, as if she'd given him something he hadn't realized he'd been missing. And as the floors counted down toward the lobby, Janelle couldn't shake the feeling that everything had just changed, in ways she was only beginning to understand. Janelle woke up to her alarm feeling like she'd barely slept at all, not because she was tired, but because her mind wouldn't stop replaying every moment from the night before, the way Christopher had said her name, the quiet intensity in his eyes when he'd thanked her, the feeling that 5 hours had passed in what seemed like 5 minutes, two minds working in perfect synchronization. She stood in her small bathroom, brushing her teeth in the mirror of her modest apartment in Virginia Highland. A far cry from the executive floor's luxury, but it was hers. The morning sunlight streaming through her single window felt different today, as if the world itself had shifted slightly off its axis. "Don't read too much into it," she told herself, pulling her hair back into its usual professional style. "He was just being nice. You did good work, that's all." But the memory of his hand on her arm, the warmth in his voice when he'd used her first name, refused to be dismissed so easily. Her phone buzzed with a text from her best friend since college, Kira. "Coffee before work? You sound different in your texts, and I need details." Janelle smiled despite her exhaustion. Kira had an uncanny ability to read between the lines, even through text messages. They met at their usual spot, a small cafe called The Daily Grind that served the best peach cobbler in the city and coffee strong enough to wake the dead. "Okay, spill," Kira said the moment Janelle sat down, not even bothering with hello. "Something happened. I can see it all over your face." "Nothing happened," Janelle protested, but she could feel heat rising in her cheeks. "Girl, please, you've got that look, like you discovered something you didn't know you were looking for." Kira stirred her coffee slowly, studying Janelle with the intensity of someone who'd been her roommate for 3 years. "Was it work? I had to stay late last night. Big project." Janelle kept her voice carefully neutral, but Kira's eyebrows shot up. "How late?" "2-ish. 2 in the morning? Doing what?" Janelle found herself describing the evening, the call to the executive floor, the collaborative work, the way Christopher had listened to her ideas without condescension. What she didn't describe was the way her pulse had quickened when their fingers accidentally touched while reaching for the same document, or how the sound of his quiet laughter had made something flutter in her chest. "Wait," Kira interrupted. "Christopher Hale, the actual CEO, the billionaire who's on magazine covers." "It wasn't like that," Janelle said quickly. "It was purely professional." Kira gave her a look that could have melted steel. "Honey, I've seen you talk about work before. You've never blushed describing a budget meeting." Before Janelle could protest further, her phone buzzed. An email from Christopher's assistant. "Miss Brooks, Mr. Hale has requested you join him for the client meeting Monday at 9 a.m. Conference materials will be sent to your email shortly. Please confirm receipt." Janelle stared at the screen. Join him? Not just prepare materials for him, but actually be in the meeting with the client. "What is it?" Kira leaned over to read the email, then sat back with a knowing smile. "Oh, this is definitely not just work anymore." "Don't be ridiculous," Janelle said, but her hands were trembling slightly as she typed her confirmation. "He probably just wants me there to answer questions about the design concepts." "Uh-huh," Kira finished her coffee and stood up. Just promise me something. When this becomes more than work, and it will, don't talk yourself out of it because you think you don't belong in his world. You belong wherever your talent and heart take you. The rest of Friday passed in a blur of refining concepts and preparing presentation materials. But every time Janelle tried to focus, she found herself remembering small moments. The way Christopher had loosened his tie as the evening wore on, making himself more approachable. How he'd insisted she call him by his first name. The genuine interest in his eyes when she'd explained her vision for the campaign. By evening, she'd created something she was genuinely proud of. Concepts that pushed boundaries while remaining accessible. Designs that told a story rather than just selling a product. As she saved the final files, she realized she wasn't just excited about the work itself, but about sharing it with Christopher, about seeing his reaction when she presented ideas that went even further than what they'd discussed. Her phone rang just as she was packing up to leave. The caller ID showed a number she didn't recognize, but something made her answer anyway. Janelle? It's Christopher. Her heart did something complicated in her chest. He was calling her directly, not through his assistant, not through official channels. His voice sounded different over the phone, more intimate somehow. I hope I'm not disturbing your Friday evening, he continued. I wanted to see how the concepts were coming along. They're finished, she said, then immediately wondered if she sounded too eager. I mean, I've completed the refinements we discussed. I think you'll be pleased with the direction. I have no doubt. There was something warm in his voice, something that made her think this call was about more than just work updates. Would you mind if I took a look tonight? I know it's the weekend, but I think more clearly in the evening. Of course, I can email them to you right now. Actually, he said, and she could hear him choosing his words carefully. I was thinking maybe we could go over them together. If you're free. There's a quiet wine bar not far from the office. Meridian on Peachtree. Nothing too formal, just a chance to discuss the concepts in a more relaxed setting. Janelle's breath caught. This was definitely not standard procedure. CEOs didn't invite interns to wine bars to discuss work, no matter how important the project. She started, then stopped. Through her office window, she could see the city lights beginning to twinkle as dusk settled over Atlanta. Somewhere out there, Christopher Hale was asking her to spend her Friday evening with him, and every rational part of her mind was at war with the part that wanted to say yes without hesitation. If it's inappropriate, I understand, he said quickly, misreading her pause. I just thought, yes, she said, surprising herself with the certainty in her voice. I'd like that. I'll see you there. After she hung up, Janelle stared at her reflection in the dark window. Kira's words echoed in her mind. Don't talk yourself out of it because you think you don't belong in his world. Maybe it was time to stop thinking so much and start trusting what felt right. And for the first time in her carefully planned life, what felt right had nothing to do with being safe. Meridian was exactly the kind of place Janelle had imagined Christopher would choose. Understated elegance without pretension. Exposed brick walls held vintage wine bottles like trophies, and soft jazz drifted from hidden speakers. Edison bulb fixtures cast warm golden light over intimate tables, each one positioned for conversation rather than display. It was the kind of place where business deals were made over handshakes, and where first dates turned into something more serious. Janelle arrived first, having changed into a simple black dress that struck the right balance between professional and, well, whatever this was. She chose a table near the back, away from the few other Friday evening patrons, and tried to calm the butterflies that had taken up permanent residence in her stomach. When Christopher walked in, scanning the room with those steel-gray eyes, Janelle felt her breath catch all over again. He'd changed too. Gone was the formal business attire, replaced by dark jeans and a charcoal sweater that made him look younger, more approachable, more like the man she'd worked with until 2 a.m., rather than the CEO whose photo graced corporate boardrooms. Sorry I'm late, he said, sliding into the seat across from her. I had to convince my driver he didn't need to wait outside like I was 16 and on my first date. The word date hung in the air between them, neither confirming nor denying what this evening actually was. No problem, Janelle said, grateful that her voice sounded steadier than she felt. I ordered us a bottle of red. I hope that's okay. The sommelier recommended something called Côte du Rhône. Christopher's eyebrows raised slightly. Good choice. How did you know I preferred red? I noticed you had wine stains on some of the documents last night. Very faint, but definitely red wine, she smiled. Occupational hazard of being a designer. You start noticing details others miss. He poured wine for both of them, his movements precise but relaxed. What else do you notice? The question seemed innocent enough, but something in his tone suggested he was asking about more than just professional observations. You're left-handed, but you've trained yourself to use your right hand for signatures because it looks more confident in board meetings, she said, watching his face for reaction. You've been working late every night this week. There are coffee rings on your desk calendar from the same mug, but in different positions each day. And you don't like being called Sir or Mr. Hale when it's just the two of us, even though you haven't actually said that out loud. Christopher leaned back, genuinely impressed. Anything else, Detective Brooks? You're nervous, she said softly. Right now. Your thumb keeps rubbing against your index finger. It's a stress response. And you've picked up your wine glass 3 times without actually drinking from it. He set the glass down and laughed. A real laugh, not the polished chuckle she'd heard him use in meetings. You're absolutely right, about all of it. He met her eyes directly. I am nervous. It's been a long time since I've wanted to make a good impression on someone. The admission hung between them, honest and vulnerable in a way that transformed the evening from professional necessity to personal choice. The concepts, Janelle said, reaching for her laptop bag, but Christopher gently placed his hand over hers. In a minute, he said. First, tell me something that's not in your personnel file. She considered this, taking a sip of wine that was better than anything she'd ever tasted. I almost didn't apply for the internship. Why not? Because I was afraid, she said simply. Afraid I wouldn't be good enough. Afraid I'd prove right all the people who said I was reaching too high, too fast. My guidance counselor in high school told me to be realistic about my goals. Even some professors suggested I consider more practical career paths. But you applied anyway. My mother worked 3 jobs to put me through school. She used to say, fear is just excitement wearing a disguise. So I figured if I was that afraid of something, it probably meant I wanted it more than I was willing to admit. Christopher was quiet for a moment, turning his wine glass slowly. My father built this company from nothing, he said finally. When I took over, everyone was waiting for me to fail, to prove that success can't be inherited, only earned. Every decision I made was scrutinized. Every risk I took was seen as evidence that I wasn't worthy of what I'd been given. How did you handle it? I worked harder than anyone else, made myself indispensable, built walls so high that criticism couldn't reach me. He looked up at her. But walls that keep criticism out also keep other things out. Connection, trust, the possibility that someone might see you for who you are, rather than what you represent. The wine, the soft lighting, the honest conversation, it was all creating an intimacy that felt both thrilling and dangerous. Christopher, Janelle started, but he held up a hand. I know what you're going to say, that this is complicated, that there are rules, expectations, professional boundaries. He leaned forward slightly. And you're right. This goes against every principle I've built my career on. Then why? Because for the first time in years, when I'm talking to someone, I'm not thinking about stock prices or board meetings or market share. I'm just present, here, with you. He paused. When was the last time you felt that way? Janelle knew the answer immediately. Last night, working with you until 2 a.m., time just disappeared. Exactly. He reached across the table, his fingers brushing against hers. So maybe we don't have to figure out what this is tonight. Maybe we just let it be what it is. The touch of his hand sent electricity up her arm, and Janelle realized she was at a crossroads. She could pull back, insist they keep things professional, protect herself from the potential complications. Or she could lean into this feeling, this connection that seemed to have a momentum of its own. The concepts, she said again, but her voice lacked conviction. Will still be brilliant tomorrow, he said softly. But this moment, this conversation, won't happen again. Not exactly like this. Outside, Atlanta's Friday night energy pulsed through the streets, but inside Meridian, time seemed suspended. Janelle looked at Christopher, really looked at him, and saw not the CEO, not the billionaire, not the man whose success story had been written about in dozens of magazines. She saw someone who was tired of being careful, tired of being alone, tired of having conversations that mattered less than the silence between them. Okay, she said, her decision made. Let's just let it be what it is. When he smiled, genuine, relieved, almost boyish, Janelle knew that whatever happened next, she would never regret this moment of choosing possibility over safety. The evening stretched ahead of them, full of potential and completely unscripted. exactly the way the best things in life always were. 3 hours later, the wine bottle sat empty between them, and Janelle felt as if she'd known Christopher for years instead of weeks. They'd talked about everything except work, her childhood in East Atlanta, his complicated relationship with legacy and expectation, her love of old jazz records, his secret addiction to terrible reality TV shows. Conversation flowed like water finding its natural path, each revelation leading to another, each shared laugh building something that felt both fragile and inevitable. "I should probably get going," Janelle said reluctantly, glancing at her phone. It was nearly midnight and the wine bar had emptied around them without either of them noticing. "Where do you live?" Christopher asked, signaling for the check. "Virginia Highland. It's not far. I can catch the MARTA or call a rideshare." "Absolutely not." He stood, offering her his hand. "It's Friday night in Atlanta. I'm walking you home." "You don't have to." "I want to," he said simply, and the way he said it made arguing impossible. They stepped out into the warm Georgia evening, the city's nighttime energy humming around them. Peachtree Street buzzed with the usual Friday crowd, couples headed to late dinners, groups of friends bar-hopping, the beautiful chaos of a city that knew how to live after dark. "This way," Janelle said, turning east. The walk would take them through some of Atlanta's most vibrant neighborhoods, past the late-night coffee shops and bookstores that made the city feel alive even at midnight. "I have a confession," Christopher said, as they fell into step together. "I looked up your address in your employment file before suggesting Meridian. I wanted to choose somewhere close to your neighborhood." "That's either very thoughtful or mildly stalkerish," Janelle teased, bumping his shoulder playfully. "I was hoping for thoughtful." They walked slowly, neither of them eager for the evening to end. Christopher had loosened up completely, his corporate posture replaced by an easy stride, his careful executive language replaced by the kind of comfortable conversation that happens between people who genuinely like each other. "Can I ask you something?" Janelle said as they passed a street musician playing guitar on a corner. "What made you call me tonight?" "Really?" Christopher was quiet for several steps, considering his answer. "This afternoon I was in back-to-back meetings. Budget reviews, strategic planning, the usual Friday corporate nightmare. And in the middle of this presentation about quarterly projections, I found myself thinking about you." He paused, running a hand through his hair. "Not about the work we'd done, but about the way you'd laughed when I'd made that terrible joke about corporate synergy. How you'd gotten excited explaining your design philosophy. The way you'd looked at the city lights like you were seeing them for the first time." They stopped at a crosswalk, waiting for the signal to change. In the glow of the streetlight, Janelle could see something vulnerable in his expression. "I realized I hadn't thought about anything but work, really thought about anything else, in months, maybe years. And suddenly, all I wanted was to see you again, to talk to you about things that mattered or things that didn't matter at all." The light changed, but neither of them moved immediately. "I scared myself," he continued, "because wanting something that much, wanting someone that much, it means you have something to lose." Janelle felt her heart do something complicated in her chest. "Christopher, I know it's crazy," he said quickly. "I know this whole situation is impossible. You work for me, there are protocols, expectations." "Stop," she said softly, placing her hand on his arm. "Just stop overthinking for one night. You said we could let this be what it is, remember?" They resumed walking, but something had shifted. The air between them felt charged, electric with possibility, and the weight of admissions that couldn't be taken back. "Tell me about your neighborhood," Christopher said, clearly trying to steer them back to safer territory. "It's not exactly executive housing," Janelle warned. "I live in a converted duplex with a temperamental water heater, and neighbors who think 2 a.m. is a perfectly reasonable time to practice drums." "Sounds perfect. You say that now, but wait until you meet Mrs. Goldstein from 4B. She's convinced I'm running some kind of illegal business because I get deliveries from art supply stores." Christopher laughed, that genuine, unguarded sound she was beginning to love. "What does she think you're making?" "Counterfeit money, apparently. She asked the mailman if my packages ever rattled." As they turned onto Janelle Street, the neighborhood's character revealed itself. Tree-lined sidewalks, historic homes converted into apartments, the comfortable shabbiness of a place where artists and young professionals lived side by side with families who'd been there for generations. "Here," Janelle said, stopping in front of a brick duplex with a small front porch and overgrown garden. "Home sweet home." Christopher looked up at the building, taking in the details, the mismatched porch furniture, the string lights someone had hung between the trees, the general sense of life being lived rather than carefully curated. "I love it," he said, and Janelle could tell he meant it. They stood there for a moment, neither wanting to acknowledge that the evening was ending. The space between them felt charged with everything they'd shared and everything they hadn't yet said. "Thank you," Janelle said finally, "for tonight, for the wine, the conversation, the walk, for making me remember that there's more to life than 5-year plans and professional networking. Thank you," he said softly, "for reminding me what it feels like to be myself instead of just my job title." He stepped closer, close enough that she could smell his cologne, something subtle and warm that made her want to close the distance between them entirely. For a moment, she thought he might kiss her, the way he was looking at her, the way the night air seemed to hold its breath around them. Everything pointed toward that inevitable conclusion. Instead, he reached up and touched her face gently, his thumb brushing across her cheek. "Janelle," he said, her name like a question and a promise all at once. "I know," she whispered, understanding perfectly what he wasn't saying, that this was wonderful and terrifying and completely unprecedented, that they were standing on the edge of something that could change everything, and neither of them was quite ready to jump. "Monday," he said. "Monday," she agreed. He stepped back reluctantly, and she watched as he walked back toward Peachtree Street, his figure growing smaller in the distance until he disappeared around the corner. Only then did Janelle realize she'd been holding her breath. As she climbed the steps to her front door, her phone buzzed with a text. "Thank you for the most honest conversation I've had in years. Sleep well." Janelle smiled, typing back, "Thank you for proving that fairy tales can happen in wine bars too." Jay inside her small apartment, as she changed out of her dress and tried to process everything that had happened. One thing was absolutely clear. Monday was going to change everything, one way or another. And for the first time in her carefully planned life, she couldn't wait to see what happened when she stopped planning and started trusting her heart. Monday morning arrived with all the subtlety of a thunderstorm. Janelle woke up an hour before her alarm, her mind immediately jumping to the presentation, to Christopher, to the impossible situation she'd somehow walked into. She'd spent the weekend alternating between replaying every moment of Friday night and trying to convince herself it had all been some wine-induced fever dream. But the texts on her phone proved otherwise. "Saturday morning. Hope you're having a good weekend. Thinking about our presentation strategy and other things. See Sunday evening. Ready to change the world tomorrow." See her response. "Ready as I'll ever be. See you at 9. Jay now, standing in her bathroom at 6 a.m. Janelle stared at her reflection and tried to decide who she was supposed to be today. The professional intern who'd earned her place through talent and hard work, or the woman who'd spent Friday night discovering that the most powerful man she'd ever met made terrible jokes and worried about disappointing his dead father. She chose her outfit, carefully, a tailored navy suit that made her feel confident without being overly formal, paired with the pearl earrings her grandmother had given her for graduation. Armor for battle, but elegant armor. The elevator ride to the 45th floor felt different this time. Instead of nervous excitement, she felt a quiet determination mixed with something that might have been anticipation. Whatever happened in today's meeting, she'd earned her place in that room. Christopher was already in the executive conference room when she arrived, reviewing presentation materials with an intensity that reminded her why he'd built a billion-dollar company before his 40th birthday. He looked up when she entered, and for just a moment she saw the man from Friday night, the one who touched her face so gently in the streetlight. "Good morning, Janelle," he said, his voice carefully professional but warm enough to remind her that everything had changed. "Good morning, Christopher," she replied, setting down her materials and immediately regretting the familiarity. They weren't alone in a wine bar anymore. This was his world, his kingdom, and she was about to find out if Friday night had been real or just an interlude between the serious business of their actual lives. "Before they arrive," he said, moving closer but not too close, "I want you to know that whatever happens in this meeting, it has nothing to do with Friday night. You're here because your work is exceptional, because you've earned this opportunity." The distinction was important, she realized. He was protecting both of them, making sure that what they'd shared wouldn't be diminished by accusations of favoritism or inappropriate influence. "I understand," she said. "Let's show them something they'll never forget." At exactly 9 a.m., the clients arrived. 3 executives from Meridian Consumer Brands, led by a sharp-eyed woman named Vivian Lancaster, who'd built her career on spotting trends before they became mainstream. These were people who'd seen hundreds of presentations, who could smell desperation and inexperience from across a conference table. "Ms. Lancaster, gentlemen, Christopher said, his CEO persona sliding into place seamlessly. "Thank you for making time for this follow-up presentation. I believe you'll find our revised approach addresses your concerns while pushing the boundaries of what's possible in your industry." As Janelle set up the presentation, she caught Vivian Lancaster watching her with curiosity. A young black woman in a room full of executives wasn't unusual in Atlanta's progressive business community, but an intern presenting directly to major clients definitely was. "Before we begin," Christopher continued, "I'd like you to meet Janelle Brooks, one of our most promising strategic designers. The concepts you're about to see represent a collaboration between our senior team and Ms. Brooks' fresh perspective on consumer engagement." The introduction was perfect, acknowledging her contribution without overstatement, positioning her as valuable without making the clients wonder why they were listening to an intern. Janelle took a breath and began. "6 months ago, your primary competitor launched a campaign that generated twice the engagement of anything in your sector," she said, clicking to the first slide. "Not because their product was better, but because they stopped talking to their customers and started talking with them." She had their attention immediately. Vivian Lancaster leaned forward, her expression shifting from polite interest to genuine curiosity. For the next 20 minutes, Janelle walked them through a complete reimagining of their consumer experience. Instead of traditional advertising, she proposed an interactive platform where customers became co-creators. Instead of selling products, they'd be selling participation in a community. Instead of asking customers to buy something, they'd be inviting them to help build something. Christopher watched from the side of the room, and occasionally their eyes would meet. In those moments, she saw pride, admiration, and something deeper, a recognition that they worked together in a way that transcended hierarchy or professional necessity. "The implementation timeline is aggressive but achievable," Janelle concluded, "and the preliminary budget analysis shows a positive ROI within the first 18 months. But more importantly, this approach positions Meridian as an industry leader rather than a follower." The room was quiet for a moment. Then Vivian Lancaster started asking questions, detailed, probing questions about logistics and scalability and market research. Questions that proved she wasn't just interested, she was already envisioning how to make it work. 40 minutes later, the clients left with handshakes, promises to review the proposal with their board, and something Janelle had never seen before: genuine excitement about a marketing campaign. "That," Christopher said after the conference room door closed, "was extraordinary." "We did it," Janelle said, the adrenaline finally catching up to her. "They loved it. They actually loved it." "You did it," he corrected, moving closer. "I've never seen Vivian Lancaster take notes during a presentation before. You didn't just meet their expectations, you changed what they thought was possible." Standing there in the quiet conference room, with the morning sun streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows and the satisfaction of shared success creating its own energy between them, Janelle felt the careful professional distance they'd maintained all morning beginning to dissolve. "Christopher," she said softly, and the way she said his name seemed to break something loose in both of them. He stepped closer, close enough that she could see the flecks of blue in his grey eyes, close enough that the space between them felt like a held breath. "We should probably discuss next steps," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Probably," she agreed, but neither of them moved. "The follow-up strategy for the client proposal can wait until this afternoon," she finished. "Yes," he said quietly. "It can wait." When his phone rang, his assistant's ringtone, they jumped apart like teenagers caught kissing at school. The spell broken, reality rushing back in. "Mr. Hale," came the voice through the intercom. "Your 10:30 is here early." Christopher closed his eyes briefly, then pressed the intercom button. "Give me 5 minutes, please." He turned back to Janelle, and in his expression she could see the same conflict she felt, the pull between what they wanted and what was wise, between the connection they'd discovered and the complications it created. "We need to talk," he said. "Really talk. About what this means, about how we navigate this." "I know. Tonight," he said. "Same place, same time, if you want to." Janelle looked at him, really looked at him, and saw not just the successful CEO or the man who'd walked her home on Friday night, but someone standing at the same crossroads she was, trying to figure out how to honor both their hearts and their responsibilities. "I want to," she said simply. As she gathered her materials and headed back to her regular workspace, Janelle carried with her the memory of how Christopher had looked at her during the presentation, with pride, with admiration, and with something that made her believe that whatever came next, they would figure it out together, because some things were worth the risk of everything. This time, Janelle arrived at Meridian first again, but everything felt different. The Monday morning presentation had changed something fundamental between them. She'd proven herself in his world, shown that she belonged at that conference table not because of his interest in her, but because of her own talent and vision. The validation felt intoxicating, but it also made the evening ahead feel more dangerous somehow. She'd chosen a different table tonight, one closer to the back, more private. The wine bar was busier on Monday evening, filled with professionals unwinding from the start of another corporate week. The ambient noise would give them cover for whatever conversation was about to happen. Christopher appeared at exactly 8 p.m., scanning the room until his eyes found hers. Tonight he looked like he'd come straight from the office, suit still impeccable, but his tie slightly loosened, his hair showing signs of a day spent running meetings and making decisions that affected hundreds of people. "Congratulations," he said, as he sat down, his voice carrying genuine warmth. "Vivian Lancaster called me an hour ago. They want to move forward." "Seriously?" Janelle felt her heart leap. "They want to implement the full campaign?" "Every single element you proposed. She specifically requested that you lead the creative team." He poured wine, the same Côte du Rhône they'd shared Friday night, she noticed. "It's a 6-figure contract, Janelle. Your first major campaign win." The magnitude of it hit her all at once. 6 months ago, she'd been a graduate student worried about student loans and job prospects. Now she was about to lead a major campaign for a Fortune 500 company. "I can't believe this is real," she said, taking a sip of wine that suddenly tasted like celebration. "Believe it," Christopher said, raising his glass, "to brilliant ideas and the brilliant woman who created them." They toasted, and in that moment, Janelle felt the intoxicating rush of professional success, mixing with the electricity of sitting across from a man who looked at her like she was the most fascinating person in the room. "Now," Christopher said, setting down his glass and leaning forward slightly, "we need to talk about the other thing." The shift in his tone made it clear he wasn't talking about work anymore. "This," he continued, gesturing between them, "whatever this is that's happening between us, because pretending it's not happening isn't working for either of us." Janelle felt her pulse quicken. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that I've spent the last 3 days trying to convince myself that Friday night was just 2 colleagues getting to know each other, that the way I felt during today's presentation, watching you command that room, seeing you in your element, was just professional pride." He paused, running a hand through his hair in a gesture she was beginning to recognize as his tell when he was wrestling with something difficult. "But I can't stop thinking about you," he said quietly, "about the way you laugh when you're really enjoying something, about how you get this little crease between your eyebrows when you're concentrating, about how it felt to walk through your neighborhood and see the city through your eyes." The honesty in his voice made something flutter in Janelle's chest. "Christopher, I know all the reasons this is complicated," he continued. "I know there are power dynamics, professional considerations, 100 ways this could go wrong. But I also know that I haven't felt this way about anyone in years, maybe ever." Janelle set down her wineglass, her hands trembling slightly. "What are you asking me?" "I'm asking if you feel it too. This connection, this pull between us that has nothing to do with work and everything to do with who we are when all the titles and expectations fall away." She looked at him, really looked at him, and saw vulnerability in those steel-grey eyes. Christopher Hale, the man who controlled boardrooms and made decisions that moved markets, was sitting across from her asking her to validate feelings that terrified him as much as they thrilled him. "Yes," she said simply, "I feel it too." The admission hung in the air between them, transforming everything. They weren't dancing around possibilities anymore. They were acknowledging a reality that demanded a response. "So what do we do about it?" she asked. "I don't know," he said honestly. "I've never been in this situation before. I've always been careful to keep my personal and professional lives completely separate. But nothing about this feels careful," he said with a rueful smile, "and for the first time in my life, I don't want to be careful. I want to see where this goes. Consequences be damned." Janelle felt a thrill of fear and excitement. "The campaign starts next week. I'll be working directly with your team, reporting to you on progress. If we do this, if we cross this line, how do we handle that?" "Very carefully," he said. "Complete transparency about professional decisions, clear boundaries during work hours, and absolute discretion until we figure out what this is and whether it's something we want to make permanent." The word permanent sent a shiver through her. "You're thinking that far ahead?" Janelle, he said, reaching across the table to take her hand. I haven't been able to think about anything else. His thumb traced across her knuckles. Such a simple touch, but one that sent electricity up her arm and straight to her heart. There's something else, she said, knowing she had to be completely honest. I've never dated anyone like you before. Like me? Successful, powerful, used to getting what you want. She paused, choosing her words carefully. I need to know this isn't just novelty for you, the successful executive dating the young intern. I need to know you see me as an equal, not a conquest. Christopher's expression grew serious. After today's presentation, after watching you handle Vivian Lancaster like you'd been doing it for years, how could I see you as anything but an equal? He tightened his grip on her hand. You're brilliant, Janelle. Talented, ambitious, fearless. You challenge me intellectually and make me want to be better at everything I do. This isn't about power or conquest. This is about connection. The sincerity in his voice made her believe him. More than that, it made her trust him with something she'd never trusted anyone with before. The possibility of letting someone see all of her, flaws and fears and dreams included. Okay, she said, the decision feeling both terrifying and inevitable. Let's see where this goes. Christopher smiled. That genuine, unguarded smile she was beginning to love, and lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles. Are you free Saturday night? He asked. I am now. Good. Because I want to take you somewhere special, somewhere that has nothing to do with work or wine bars or professional boundaries. Where? Trust me. Janelle looked at him, at this man who was offering her not just romance but partnership, not just attraction, but respect, and felt something settle into place in her chest. Yes, she said, I trust you. As they left Meridian that night, walking close enough that their hands brushed with each step, Janelle realized they'd crossed more than just professional lines. They'd crossed into territory where the stakes were higher, where the potential for both joy and heartbreak multiplied exponentially, and for the first time in her life, she was ready for both. Christopher's idea of somewhere special turned out to be a private rooftop dinner on top of the Equitable Building, 40 floors above downtown Atlanta. When the elevator opened directly onto the rooftop, Janelle stepped out into what looked like a scene from a romantic movie. String lights had been woven between the building's architectural details, creating a canopy of warm golden light above a single table set for two. The entire city spread out below them, a glittering tapestry of lights and life that made her feel like they were floating above the world. How did you... she started, then stopped, overwhelmed by the thoughtfulness of it all. I know people, Christopher said simply, but she could see the nervousness in his eyes. Do you like it? Like it? Janelle turned in a slow circle, taking in the 360-degree view of Atlanta. Christopher, this is incredible. He'd clearly put thought into every detail. The table was set with real china and crystal glasses, with a single white orchid as a centerpiece. Soft jazz played from hidden speakers, the same kind of music they'd heard at Meridian, but somehow more intimate up here under the stars. I wanted our first real date to be something you'd remember, he said, pulling out her chair. Trust me, she said, settling into the seat. This isn't something I'm likely to forget. Dinner was served by a discreet catering team who appeared only long enough to deliver each course before disappearing again, leaving them alone with the city lights and each other. The food was exquisite, some kind of perfectly prepared salmon that melted in her mouth, paired with wine that probably cost more than her monthly rent. But what Janelle would remember most wasn't the luxury, it was the conversation. Away from wine bars and professional settings, they talked like people who'd known each other for years. Christopher told her about growing up in the shadow of his father's expectations, about the loneliness that came with success, about the way responsibility could sometimes feel like a prison made of gold. I used to come up here when I was younger, he said during dessert, gesturing toward the cityscape, after particularly brutal board meetings or when the pressure felt overwhelming. There's something about being this high up that puts things in perspective. What kind of perspective? Janelle asked, following his gaze out over the city. That most of the things we worry about are smaller than we think, that the city keeps moving whether we succeed or fail, that maybe the point isn't to control everything, but to find the few things worth caring about and hold on to them. He turned to look at her, and in the soft glow of the string lights, his expression was more open than she'd ever seen it. Is that what this is? She asked softly. One of the things worth holding on to? I think it might be, he said, if you'll let it be. After dinner, they moved to the building's edge, where a low wall provided the perfect place to lean and take in the view. Christopher stood behind her, his arms loosely around her waist, and Janelle felt safer and more cherished than she ever had in her life. "Tell me something you've never told anyone else," she said, leaning back against his chest. "I almost didn't take over the company," he said quietly. "When my father died, I seriously considered selling it and doing something completely different, maybe teaching or working for a non-profit, something that felt more meaningful than profit margins and market share. What changed your mind?" "I realized that meaning isn't about what you do. It's about how you do it and who you do it for. The company gives me the resources to make real change in the world. And now," he tightened his arms around her slightly, "now it's brought me you." Janelle turned in his arms, and suddenly they were face to face, mere inches apart. The city lights reflected in his eyes, but all she could focus on was the way he was looking at her, like she was something precious and unexpected, something he couldn't quite believe he was allowed to have. "Janelle," he said, her name like a question. "Yes," she whispered, answering the question he hadn't asked. When he kissed her, it was nothing like the hesitant professional restraint they'd maintained all week. This kiss was sure and deep, and full of all the feelings they'd been holding back. It tasted like wine and possibility, like the kind of moment that divides a life into before and after. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Christopher rested his forehead against hers. "I should probably take you home," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Probably," she agreed, but made no move to step away from him. Unless what? "Unless you'd like to see the sunset from here tomorrow morning." The invitation was clear, and Janelle felt her heart skip several beats. This was the moment, the decision that would take them from romantic possibility to actual relationship, from careful flirtation to genuine intimacy. She thought about all the reasons she should say no, about the complications of mixing business with pleasure, about the potential for gossip and judgment, about the risk of getting her heart broken by a man whose world was so different from hers. But then she looked at Christopher, really looked at him, and saw not the CEO or the billionaire or the man whose picture graced magazine covers. She saw someone who'd spent his evening trying to make her feel special, who'd shared his most vulnerable thoughts, who was offering her not just his desire, but his trust. "I'd love to see the sunrise with you," she said. The smile that spread across his face was worth every risk, every complication, every potential consequence. As the elevator carried them down to the parking garage where his car waited, Janelle felt as if she were descending not just floors, but into a new version of her life entirely. Tomorrow, she would wake up as someone different, someone who had taken the leap, someone who had chosen love over safety. And looking at Christopher, at the way he held her hand like it was something precious, she couldn't wait to see who that person would become. The night stretched ahead of them, full of promise and possibility, exactly the way the best beginnings always were. Janelle woke up to sunlight streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows she didn't recognize, in a bed that felt like sleeping on a cloud. For a moment, disorientation clouded her thoughts. Then she remembered Christopher's penthouse apartment, the night they'd shared, the way he'd held her as they watched the sun rise over Atlanta from his private terrace. She was in his bedroom now, wearing one of his Princeton t-shirts, surrounded by the quiet luxury of a life she'd never imagined being part of. The space beside her was empty, but still warm, and she could hear the soft sounds of movement from somewhere else in the apartment, the quiet clink of dishes, the hum of an espresso machine. Christopher making breakfast. She stretched, allowing herself a moment to process everything that had changed in the span of 12 hours. Last night hadn't been just about physical intimacy, though that had been incredible in ways she'd never experienced before. It had been about emotional vulnerability, about two people deciding to trust each other with parts of themselves they usually kept hidden. "Good morning, beautiful." Janelle looked up to find Christopher standing in the doorway, holding 2 cups of coffee and looking impossibly handsome in jeans and a simple white t-shirt. His hair was tousled from sleep, and there was something so domestic, so normal about the moment that it made her heart skip. "Good morning," she said, accepting the coffee gratefully. "Please tell me you didn't cook an elaborate breakfast. I'm not sure my system can handle more perfection after last night." He laughed, settling onto the bed beside her. "Just coffee and some pastries from the bakery downstairs. Though I should probably warn you, the pastries are from a place that has a 6-month waiting list." "Of course they are," Janelle said, but she was smiling. "Is there anything in your life that isn't exclusive or impossible to get?" "You," he said simply. "Until recently, anyway." The honesty in his voice made something warm spread through her chest. She curled up against his side, inhaling the scent of his cologne, mixed with coffee and morning air. "Christopher," she said softly, "what happens now? What do you mean? Tomorrow's Monday. We go back to being CEO and intern, to board meetings and project deadlines. How do we navigate that?" She felt him tense slightly, and when she looked up at his face, she could see the concern there. This was the conversation they'd been avoiding, the practical reality that came after the romantic fantasy. "Carefully," he said, "very carefully. The campaign team you'll be leading reports to Davidson, not directly to me. We'll have minimal professional interaction, at least for the next few weeks. And personally? Personally, I'd like to see you every night for the rest of my life," he said, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "But realistically, we need to be discreet. No public dates, no office interactions that could raise eyebrows, at least until we figure out what this is and whether it's sustainable long-term." Janelle sat up, studying his expression. "You sound like you're already planning for problems." "I'm planning for success," he corrected. "I'm planning for this to be something real, something lasting, and if it is, then we need to protect it until we're ready to make it public." She understood the logic, but something about it made her chest tighten. "How long are we talking about? Weeks? Months?" "I don't know," he said honestly. "I've never done this before. I've never wanted to protect something this much." They were interrupted by the sound of Christopher's phone buzzing insistently from the nightstand. He glanced at it, and his expression shifted. "Davidson," he said, showing her the caller ID. "He never calls on weekends unless it's urgent." "Answer it," Janelle said, though something cold settled in her stomach. Christopher swiped to answer. "James, what's going on?" Even from where she sat, Janelle could hear the agitation in Davidson's voice through the speaker, though she couldn't make out the words. She watched Christopher's face grow increasingly grim as he listened. "I see," Christopher said finally. "How bad is it?" More unintelligible words from Davidson, but his tone was unmistakably worried. "No, don't do anything yet," Christopher said. "I'll handle it. Give me an hour." He hung up and sat in silence for a moment, running his hands through his hair. "What is it?" Janelle asked, though she was beginning to suspect she didn't want to know the answer. "Someone took photos," Christopher said quietly, "of us. Last night at Meridian, on Monday walking to your apartment Friday night. They're shopping them to gossip blogs." The words hit Janelle like ice water. "Photos." Davidson's contact at Atlanta Business Journal called him. "Apparently someone's been following us for over a week. The photos are compromising. Us holding hands, the kiss on your street, you leaving here this morning." "This morning?" Janelle's voice came out as a whisper. "Someone photographed me leaving your apartment. Security footage shows someone with a telephoto lens in the building across the street. They've been watching for days." The full implications crashed over her like a wave. Her career, her reputation, her future, all of it could be destroyed by whoever was behind this. She'd be branded as the intern who slept her way to success, the ambitious young woman who used her body to advance her career. "Who would do this?" she asked, though her hands were already shaking. "I don't know," Christopher said, reaching for her, but she pulled away. "This is exactly what I was afraid of," she said, standing up and starting to pace. "This is why workplace relationships are forbidden, why there are rules and boundaries and professional ethics. Janelle, we'll figure this out." "How?" She turned to face him, and he could see the panic in her eyes. "How do we figure this out? If those photos go public, I'm done. My career, my reputation, everything I've worked for. I'll be the intern who slept with the CEO. Nothing else I ever accomplish will matter." Christopher stood up, his own face pale but determined. "I won't let that happen. I have lawyers, resources. Money can't fix this," Janelle said, tears starting to blur her vision. "Money can't change people's minds once they've decided who you are." "Then what are you saying?" The question hung in the air between them, loaded with implications that neither of them wanted to face. "I'm saying," Janelle said slowly, her voice breaking, "that maybe we were naive to think this could work. Maybe some lines shouldn't be crossed, no matter how much we want to cross them." "You don't mean that?" "Don't I?" She looked at him, at this man she'd fallen for so completely in such a short time, and felt her heart breaking in real time. "Last night was beautiful, Christopher. Maybe the most beautiful night of my life, but it might have just cost me everything I've worked for." She started gathering her clothes, her movements sharp and decisive. "Where are you going?" "Home," she said without looking at him. "I need to think. I need to figure out how to protect myself from whatever's coming. Janelle, please, don't let fear make this decision for us." She stopped at the bedroom door, her hand on the frame, and turned back to look at him one last time. Standing there in his expensive apartment, With his resources and his lawyers and his ability to weather any scandal, he looked like everything she couldn't have, everything she'd been foolish to reach for. "Fear isn't making this decision," she said quietly. "Reality is." As she left his apartment and stepped into the harsh morning light, Janelle felt like she was walking away from more than just Christopher. She was walking away from the version of herself who had believed, for just a few precious days, that love could conquer anything. But as the elevator descended toward the lobby, one thought echoed in her mind. Some fairy tales were too dangerous to live in, no matter how beautiful they seemed from the inside. 3 weeks later, Janelle sat in her small apartment staring at an email that would change everything. The Meridian campaign had been a spectacular success. The interactive platform she'd designed had generated twice the projected engagement, and industry publications were calling it revolutionary. Job offers had started pouring in from agencies across the country, New York, Los Angeles, Chicago, all wanting the young designer who'd reimagined consumer engagement. But the email on her laptop screen wasn't about another job offer. It was from Vivian Lancaster herself. "Miss Brooks, I've been following the industry buzz around your work with great interest. I'm writing to offer you a position as creative director at Meridian Consumer Brands. The role would involve leading our entire creative strategy across all brands, with a starting salary that I believe will exceed any other offers you've received. More importantly, this position would allow you to continue developing the innovative approach you've pioneered. You've proven that you're not just talented, you're transformative. I hope you'll consider joining our team. The offer expires Friday. Best regards, Vivian Lancaster, CEO, Meridian Consumer Brands." Janelle read the email for the 5th time, her hands trembling slightly. Creative director. At 25. It was everything she'd dreamed of, everything she'd worked toward since graduate school. The kind of opportunity that came once in a lifetime, and it would take her away from Atlanta, away from Hale Innovations, away from Christopher. She hadn't spoken to him since that Sunday morning 3 weeks ago. They'd managed to avoid each other completely at the office, not difficult, since she'd been working with Davidson's team and Christopher had been traveling for business. But the silence between them felt like a physical weight, growing heavier with each passing day. Her phone buzzed. A text from Kira. "Coffee? You've been hiding long enough." 20 minutes later, Janelle found herself back at the daily grind, across from her best friend who was studying her with the concerned expression she'd been wearing for weeks. "You look terrible," Kira said without preamble. "And before you argue, I mean it kindly. You look like someone who hasn't been sleeping." "I've been sleeping fine," Janelle lied, stirring her coffee unnecessarily. "Right. And I'm sure it has nothing to do with the fact that you've been avoiding a certain billionaire CEO for 3 weeks. Janelle's head snapped up. "How did you— Honey, please. You disappeared for an entire weekend, came back looking like you'd discovered something wonderful, then spent the next 3 weeks looking like someone stole your favorite everything. It doesn't take a detective." Janelle sighed, pulling out her phone and showing Kira the email from Vivian Lancaster. Kira read it twice, her eyebrows climbing higher with each line. "Janelle, this is incredible. Creative director. At your age, this is the kind of job people spend decades working toward." "I know, but you don't sound excited." "I am excited," Janelle said, but even she could hear how unconvincing she sounded. "It's everything I've wanted. Except it means leaving Atlanta, leaving everything I've built here." "Leaving him, you mean?" Janelle closed her eyes, feeling tears threaten for the 100th time in 3 weeks. "It doesn't matter. That's over." "Is it? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you're about to make a major life decision based on running away from something that scared you." "I'm not running away. I'm being practical. I'm protecting my career." "From what?" "From being happy." Before Janelle could answer, her phone rang. Davidson's number. "Miss Brooks?" His voice sounded strange, tense. "I need you to come to the office immediately. There's been a development." "What kind of development?" "The kind that requires damage control." "How quickly can you get here?" 30 minutes later, Janelle walked into Davidson's office to find him pacing behind his desk, looking more agitated than she'd ever seen him. "Sit down," he said, gesturing to a chair. "We have a problem." "What kind of problem?" Davidson pulled out his phone and showed her a screenshot of an online article. The headline made her blood run cold. "Hale Innovations, CEO's Secret Romance, Power, Passion and Preferential Treatment." Below the headline was a photo of her and Christopher walking out of Meridian together, her hand in his, both of them looking at each other with unmistakable intimacy. "It went live an hour ago," Davidson said. 3 major business publications have already picked it up. The board is meeting in emergency session this afternoon. Janelle felt the world tilt around her. How bad is it? Bad. The article suggests you received the Meridian project because of your personal relationship with Christopher. It questions every professional decision he's made regarding your career. It paints you as an opportunist and him as someone who's compromised the company's integrity. None of that is true, Janelle said quietly. The relationship started after I was already working on the project. I know that. You know that. Christopher knows that. But public perception doesn't care about timelines. Davidson sat down across from her, his expression gentler than she'd expected. Janelle, I'm going to be honest with you. The board is going to want someone to blame for this. And it's not going to be Christopher. The implication was clear. Her internship, her future at Hale Innovations, everything she'd built here was about to disappear. I should resign, she said, the words tasting like ash in her mouth. That's one option. But there's another. Before Davidson could explain, the office door opened and Christopher walked in. He looked like he hadn't slept in days, his usually perfect appearance slightly disheveled, his eyes carrying a weight that made Janelle's heart clench. What's the other option? She asked, not taking her eyes off Christopher. A press conference, Christopher said, his voice steady but strained. This afternoon, we tell the truth about the timeline, about your qualifications, about the fact that your success has nothing to do with our personal relationship. And then what? We pretend the personal relationship doesn't exist. We acknowledge it, he said, stepping closer. We tell them that yes, we developed feelings for each other, but that it happened after your professional merit had already been established. We make it clear that your talent speaks for itself. Janelle stared at him. You want to go public, officially. I want to protect you, he said simply. I want to protect your reputation, your career, your future, even if it costs me mine. The board will crucify you. Maybe. Or maybe they'll see what I see, that you're the most talented designer this company has ever worked with, and that my personal feelings don't change that fact. Davidson cleared his throat. There's a third option we haven't discussed. Both Janelle and Christopher turned to him. Miss Brooks takes the Lancaster position, leaves Atlanta, starts fresh somewhere her reputation won't be colored by this scandal. Meridian has already stated publicly that they're hiring her based solely on merit. It would distance both of you from the situation. The silence in the room was deafening. Janelle could see the calculation in Christopher's eyes, the way he was processing the logic of Davidson's suggestion. She could also see the pain there, the recognition that protecting her might mean losing her. That's not a choice, Christopher said finally. That's surrender. It's practical, Davidson countered. It protects everyone. No, Christopher said, his voice gaining strength. I won't let her run away because other people can't handle the idea that two talented people fell in love while working together. I won't let this company lose the best creative mind we've ever had because of gossip and speculation. He turned to Janelle, and in his eyes, she saw everything he'd been trying to tell her for 3 weeks without saying a word. The press conference is in 2 hours, he said. I'm going to stand up there and tell them exactly who you are, what you've accomplished, and why this company is lucky to have you, with or without you standing beside me. Christopher, I love you, he said simply, the words falling into the silence like stones into still water. I love your mind, your ambition, your courage, your integrity. I love the way you challenge me and the way you make me want to be better at everything I do. And I'm not going to let fear, yours or mine, destroy something this real. Janelle felt tears spilling down her cheeks. If we do this, there's no going back. Everything changes. Everything already changed, he said softly. The moment you walked into that conference room 3 weeks ago and showed me what innovation actually looks like, the moment I realized that all my success meant nothing if I couldn't share it with someone who understood what it cost to achieve it. Davidson stood up, checking his watch. I need an answer. The media is already gathering downstairs. Janelle looked at Christopher, at this man who was willing to risk everything he'd built to protect her reputation and defend their love. Then she thought about the job offer in her laptop, about the safety of starting over somewhere new, about all the rational reasons to choose the path that led away from complications and toward guaranteed success. Finally, she thought about her mother's words. Fear is just excitement wearing a disguise. I'm not running away, she said, standing up and wiping her tears. If you're going to face this, we're going to face it together. Christopher's smile was like sunrise after the longest night. Are you sure? He asked. I'm sure, she said, reaching for his hand. Let's go tell them our story. As they walked toward the elevator that would take them to the press conference, to the cameras and questions and judgment of the world, Janelle felt something she hadn't felt in 3 weeks. Hope, because sometimes the most dangerous thing you can do is also the only thing worth doing. And sometimes love really is strong enough to weather any storm, as long as you're brave enough to stand in it together. 2 years later, the morning sun filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the corner office on the 42nd floor, casting golden light across the nameplate that read, Janelle Brooks, Creative Director. Janelle stood at those windows, coffee in hand, watching Atlanta wake up below her. 2 years ago, she'd been an intern looking up at this building from the street, dreaming of making her mark. Now she could see her reflection in every major campaign billboard visible from this height. Work that bore her creative signature. Work that had redefined what innovation looked like in their industry. Admiring your empire? She turned to find Christopher leaning against her office doorframe, that familiar smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Even after 2 years, the sight of him could still make her heart skip a beat. Just thinking about how far we've come, she said, moving toward him. We have an empire now? He asked, wrapping his arms around her waist. We have something better, she said, going up on her toes to kiss him softly. We have a partnership. The press conference 2 years ago had been a media sensation. For 3 months they'd been front-page news. The billionaire CEO and the talented intern who'd fallen in love against all odds. The scrutiny had been intense, the criticism harsh, but they'd weathered it together. The board had ultimately stood behind Christopher, especially after the Meridian campaign generated record-breaking results and industry recognition. Janelle's promotion to creative director had been announced 6 months later, based on a portfolio of work that spoke for itself and client testimonials that made her value undeniable. Mrs. Goldstein called this morning, Janelle said, settling into Christopher's arms. She wants to know if we're bringing dates to her anniversary party next weekend. What did you tell her? That we'd check our calendars, Janelle grinned. She still thinks you're too fancy for the neighborhood. I love that neighborhood, Christopher said. I love our duplex. I love that Mrs. Goldstein makes us cookies and asks inappropriate questions about our love life. 6 months ago, they'd bought the duplex next to Janelle's old apartment. Christopher had wanted to give her something grander, but she'd insisted on staying rooted in the community that had shaped her. Now they had the best of both worlds, privacy when they needed it, but neighbors who treated them like family rather than celebrities. Speaking of our love life, Christopher said, his voice taking on a nervous quality that immediately got Janelle's attention. What about it? Well, I was thinking it might be time to make it more official. Janelle pulled back to look at him, noticing for the first time that his usual confidence seemed to have deserted him entirely. Christopher, what are you? I had this whole plan, he said, talking faster than usual. Dinner at the place where we had our first date, string lights, the perfect romantic setting, but then I realized that our love story isn't about perfect settings. It's about ordinary moments that become extraordinary because we're sharing them. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small velvet box, and Janelle's breath caught in her throat. It's about late nights working on projects that matter, about walking through your neighborhood and making it our neighborhood, about Mrs. Goldstein's cookies and terrible reality TV shows, and the way you get that little crease between your eyebrows when you're concentrating. He opened the box to reveal a ring that was absolutely perfect, elegant but not ostentatious, classic but with an unexpected twist, exactly like everything else about their relationship. It's about choosing each other every day, even when it's complicated, even when the world is watching, even when it would be easier to walk away. Christopher dropped to one knee right there in her office, with the morning sun streaming around them and the city spread out below. Janelle Brooks, you changed my life the moment you walked into that conference room. You made me remember who I wanted to be, not just who I thought I had to be. Will you marry me? Janelle looked down at this man who'd risked everything for her, who'd stood beside her through media storms and board meetings and the everyday challenges of building a life together. She thought about the scared intern who'd almost turned down this internship, about the woman who'd nearly run away to New York rather than fight for what she wanted. Yes, she said, laughing through tears she hadn't realized were falling. Yes, of course, yes. As Christopher slipped the ring onto her finger, Janelle felt the same sense of rightness she'd experienced that first night, working beside him until 2 a.m. Some things were just meant to be, no matter how impossible they seemed at the beginning. I love you, she said, pulling him to his feet and kissing him with all the joy and certainty in her heart. I love you too, he murmured against her lips, My brilliant, fearless, extraordinary partner in everything. Later that day, as they sat on their front porch sharing the news with Mrs. Goldstein over her homemade cookies, Janelle reflected on the journey that had brought them here. The scared young woman who'd stepped into that elevator 2 years ago could never have imagined this life. Not just the professional success or the beautiful love story, but the sense of completeness that came from finding someone who saw all of her and chose to stay. You know what this means, Mrs. Goldstein said, interrupting her thoughts. What's that? Janelle asked. I get to plan the engagement party, and don't even think about arguing. I've been waiting 2 years for this moment. Christopher laughed, the sound mixing with the evening sounds of their neighborhood, children playing, neighbors calling to each other, the comfortable rhythm of life being lived. I think that sounds perfect, he said, squeezing Janelle's hand. As the sun set over Atlanta, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold, Janelle realized that fairy tales didn't always end with happily ever after. Sometimes they ended with something better, happily ever after. And this is just the beginning. Because the best love stories aren't about perfect endings. They're about imperfect people choosing to build something beautiful together, one ordinary, extraordinary day at a time. And sometimes, when you're brave enough to reach for what seems impossible, you discover that the only thing standing between you and your dreams is the courage to believe you deserve them. What did you think of Janelle and Christopher's journey? Have you ever had to choose between safety and following your heart? Your participation in the channel is very important. Please leave your opinion in the comments. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, leave a like and comment your thoughts. Your participation is very important to us. See you next time.